What is the most you have ever earned from a book that nobody knows you wrote?
Well, that's a good one. Okay. I don't know that my handwriting is the best, but we're going to do our best. Okay, and I don't show it to you now, correct?
Yeah, don't show it to me yet. We're going to come back to it at the end, bring it full circle.
Okay, all right, got it.
I have found that when people ask me what I do and I tell them I'm a ghostwriter, a lot of people have no idea what that means. And
Or they say,
then,
when you write about ghosts.
yeah, you write about ghosts. Okay, yeah. So then I will often explain to them that most of their favorite songs or celebrity memoirs or even like speeches that they love were very likely written by a ghostwriter. And then they get pretty interested. So I know that you specialize in writing books, specifically memoirs,
Yes.
for people who have a big story to tell. What would you say is the most common question you get asked about what you do?
Apart from, is it legal, which is something that most people do ask, is like, how does that work? How are you able to capture somebody else's voice accurately? That's probably one of the biggest, most frequent questions.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And what I assume it probably looks a little bit different for everybody, but that actually was one of my questions. Like, how, if you're writing like a 50,000 page memoir for somebody, what does it take for you to get so far inside a stranger's mind that you can write as them?
That's a good question. So I like to do, and you're right that everybody has their own process. I like to do a lot of interviews at the very start of the project. So sometimes people already have somewhat of an online presence. They may have done some speaking engagements. They may have been on television, or they may have just kept a journal for many years. So whatever they have before we begin our work, I like to review just to get a sense of their personality and maybe a little bit of their writing style. Once we begin interviews, I like to do either like this, where I can physically see them, or if it's a possibility, I like to meet in person. And that's sometimes even better because you can get a sense of, I feel like in person you can build trust easier and faster, especially if it's in a space where they feel comfortable. So like if it's in their home or their office or their favorite vacation spot, the guard is going to come down a lot easier and they will easily fall into reminiscing and memory sharing and storytelling, I feel. So it's similar, in my opinion, to being an actor in that you have to study a role to become that person on film. And I'm doing the same thing. So in the interviews, of course, I record everything. In fact, I use one of these. It's a Sony voice recorder. And I record all the interviews so that I don't have to like sit and type or sit and write because I just can't remember. So I record all the interviews, transcribe them. And as you can imagine, over a number of hours, weeks, months, sometimes my interviews go up to 40 hours or sometimes even 60 over the first few weeks or months. I really get to know that person well. Not only do I know what their body language is, I know their voice, I know their tone, I know their background, I know if they have a religious perspective, I know if they have cultural differences, just all of these things you begin to learn about a person the more you spend time with them and the more you hear them speak. And so by the time it's outline time or even beyond that, when I'm sitting down to write in their voice, I have several hundred pages of just raw data that I can draw from that's all in their voice from our interviews. And when I need to create a segue or create a scene or build some character development, I can hear their voice in my head because I've been with them for so long. So I can write in the way they would write. And of course, they get the opportunity to review it and go, I would say this a little bit differently, or I wouldn't use that word, use this one. But when you're working from so much of their raw content, I feel it's easier to capture their voice in that way.
Wow. That's a cool analogy. It's like being an actor and getting into the role of that person. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
I
So
do. I'm paid to play pretend, to be somebody else my whole
yeah,
career.
that's funny. So when people ask you, is it legal?
Mhm.
Where I would have never even thought of that question, but where do you think that comes from?
I don't know that I would have thought of that either. but it does get asked frequently. And so I must assume that they think it's cheating, almost like you're cheating in school or something. You're going to get hand slapped, you're going to get thrown out. And that's, lack of knowledge of the industry, which why would you know that if you're not in this industry? But it does give me an opportunity to share more about what ghostwriting is, how prevalent it is. I often joke that it's the second oldest profession in the world because, you have sex work and then you have people needing to write and communicate, and you had scribes. That's what the scribes were doing. The scribes weren't necessarily writing their own diaries, they were following their leader, commander, person around, capturing their voice. That's ghostwriting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. So when you I guess, like, because you're not writing fictional things, like, you're taking somebody's life and then crafting it into a story. So how do you take, like, years or sometimes decades of somebody's memories
Mhm.
and how do you craft it into an actual story arc? Like, how do you determine, okay, what is the story here?
Mhm. So with memoir, I feel there are usually a few, if not one specific, very obvious through line. Most of the memoirs I work on are trauma memoirs, meaning the person is writing about coming out of war, getting through a divorce in a difficult situation, losing a child, losing a spouse, and then trying to rebuild a life on the other side of that. And so that's a pretty obvious, like, hero's journey through line. Some people's are building a business. How did they build a business? How did they come back after two bankruptcies? But there's still the trajectory of getting through all the turbulent times, having that shape the person you became. And now, you are here where you are now because of all of these choices that you've made. So I think it's pretty easy, at least for me, to pick a through line and have them go, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. And then once we agree on that, then we'll create the outline together. And to your point, creating the outline, like, we're not going to share everything that's ever happened in somebody's life. Like, not even in an autobiography could you share everything that's happened, but we're going to pick some of the most impactful points throughout the whole story. Pivotal moments, important relationships, disasters, catastrophes, disappointments, loss, all the things that really come to mind first when a person is thinking over their life trajectory. We build the story around that and
Wow.
then fill in the details as they come up in conversation.
I imagine that that would probably sometimes feel almost like therapy for some of these people. Like they're spending dozens of hours divulging their life to you, and you probably like it's probably your job to like dig into those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, I took NLP training, which is neuro linguistic programming training, so that I could specifically help my clients through triggering memories, because I did have an incident early on in my career where something happened in the interview. She had a memory. This woman had experienced awful abuse, severe abuse. She had never spoke her abuser's name out loud until this interview with me. And when she said his name out loud, she collapsed to the floor and started crying. And we're in person. I'm like, what do I do? Do I go on the floor and be with her? Do I wait? What do I do? And so I thought after that, project ended, I really need to educate myself on how best to not only help my clients feel safe and walk them through those triggering memories, but how do I also leave it and not bring it home with me? Because I did have instances where I was helping another lady through her story, and her 2-year-old son tragically drowned in the backyard pool. And she had done a lot of therapy. And so she was able to tell me, like, in great detail, everything that happened around that scene so that I could help her, write the chapter. And I would have flashbacks about that scene, even though it's not my story. I would have dreams about the little boy. And it wasn't my memory, but she had been able to tell me in such great detail that I was like, somehow it became my own. And so I needed to learn how to set up emotional boundaries and how to process through things so that I don't carry that home with me, because I have my own baggage. I don't need additional baggage, from clients. So I'm not a therapist, but many of the clients do say, gosh, this feels like therapy. And some of them have never gone to therapy or had a therapeutic conversation before they come to me. And so in those cases, it's really raw.
Yeah. Have you ever I wondered this before because I imagine like you have to get so almost like intimate with this person and like really understand not only their life and their stories, but like the way they think and the way they've processed those stories.
Yeah.
Have you ever run into a client where there was something that you knew you needed to understand more for the story and they like almost didn't want to talk about it?
Yes. Yeah, that has happened. And, if somebody doesn't want to talk about things, if I mention it a few times, like if I think it's important and I try and like lead the conversation back and they just refuse to talk about it or say like, hey, I just can't go there. Okay, then we're not going to go there because it's your story and you don't have to divulge everything. Not all your family secrets, need to be known. So that's okay.
Hmm.
The client has the last say.
Right. I guess you've probably like really honed in this craft by now, so this probably doesn't happen. But like, has there ever been a client that you found like you just couldn't find their voice or their story?
Hmm. Hmm. I just got fired last week from one.
Really?
Did. I did. I've been fired I've been let go 5 times over the last 25 years. So it doesn't happen often, but sometimes you truly are just not the right fit. And with this client, we had met in person. We'd done 17 hours of interviews, and I felt as though I really nailed her voice. But from her perspective, it just wasn't what she wanted. And she couldn't explain differently how she wanted it. So I did 4 different revisions. And at the end of 4 revisions, she was just like, it's still not quite right. And I was like, I think you need to find another writer because I'm doing my best and it's just not a match, which is fine. Like somebody else will come my way and you're going to meet the perfect person for you.
Mm.
So it does, like the first few times it happens, it stings. And then after that, you're like, well, it's just part of the process. And if both of your, if my goal and her goal is to have the greatest book, then great, partner with whoever you need to have that book.
Hmm. So how does that work logistically then? If you guys have agreed to work together and you've already started sinking hours into it,
Mhm.
and then you're in the process and you guys both decide, okay, this we're not going to continue with this. How does that work for you in terms of like your services?
Well, it depends on what the contracts say. So my contracts, I always have a no fault clause, and I highly recommend all ghostwriters and contractors have something similar. But the gist of it is if you're involved in the work and for whatever reason, one party or both decides it's just not a good fit anymore, you decide you give 2 weeks written notice in an email, or you could do it, in a letter, but in an email, and just say, I just don't think this is the right fit. Let's end our engagement. And then, depending on what the contract says, either no more payments are made, or maybe one party has to make a partial refund to the other. But then that's it. And so, in those instances, I would turn over, and I have all of the interviews that I did for the client. So she has those because it's her story. And I was paid for that portion of it. So she gets all of the interviews and, she can work with the drafts that I have to give to the next writer as an example of like parts of this is what I like, but I don't like the whole thing. So that's it. And then you go like, all right, best of luck. That's it.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So you because it's such a lengthy process, you kind of get paid in chunks for each phase. And so if that phase has been done and at that point you guys decide, okay, this isn't the right fit,
Hmm.
you still get paid for that portion of it and she still gets those kind of assets that you've created from it, which could be a huge help to maybe the next ghostwriter that she
Yes,
hires.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and the payment schedule, that also depends on, is it coming through an agency? Is it a private client of mine? Like how, is it from a publisher? Publishers typically work in 4 or 5 payments. Agencies often do the same. I schedule my payments monthly over the whole timeline, and that seems to be easier for me and for the client to budget for. That's what I prefer.
Hmm. Interesting. So I
Mhm.
know you had kind of a whole background in writing, editing, publishing before you pivoted to starting your own ghostwriting business. So what
Yes.
made you want to make that pivot and go off on your own?
Oh, man. So I graduated college with, you know, one of my minors was English. I had 3 minors, but I was always like the nerd kid at the library, coaching others, mentoring others. It was just so natural to me. And so pretty soon after graduation, I got hired by a local publishing house because I had some resume experience. They actually hired me to ghostwrite 2 books, and I didn't even know what that was. So that was like trial by fire. I learned, like, what does that mean? What do I have to do? I was at that point working from a Sony Walkman. So this woman that I was writing for had, she was a speaker and she had cassette tapes. And so I was transcribing her cassette tapes and then adding additional information to create these 2 smaller books. So that was hilarious. That also shows my age, and that's fine. But that is how I got into it. And then I ended up working for 4 years for that publisher, and I moved up the ranks till I was managing editor over a department. As a managing editor, I managed everything, the projects, the contracts, the production. In that role, I got to see how much ghostwriters and editors were being paid. And there was a huge discrepancy, like how much we were paying at that point, $12 an hour for editors. And, ghostwriters were making, 20, 30, $50,000 per project. And so to me, it was like, well, the math doesn't math. If I go out on my own, I'm going to pick ghostwriting, both for the money and also because I really liked the idea of setting my own schedule, having my own flexibility with my life. And so at that point, I still had no idea that I was going to eventually start my own business. But seeing the contracts, managing the contracts, and deciding the type of life I wanted to live and the goals I wanted to reach. Like, to me, when I decided to become a freelancer, I still did a ton of editing as soon as I came out of the corporate world. But more and more, I started taking on ghostwriting projects, and I just loved them. So in one way I sort of followed the money, but I also followed my passion of I really like this storytelling. I really like spending time with people. And that's what this has turned into.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh man. So this kind of brings me to something that I feel like I've been wrestling with in my own ghostwriting services because I focus on social media content.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked about this. What's that?
I said, God bless you.
You and I talked about in our voice notes that interviews are a big part of both of our processes. And something that I feel like I've struggled with in my own ghostwriting is just feeling like I have enough like credibility to charge more for my services.
Ooh.
And I know you'd said that like when we were talking before, you'd said that your rates aren't posted on your website because it's crafted and it's kind of specific to each individual's projects. So when you kind of first made that pivot into ghostwriting, can you remember, was there like a first time that you quoted somebody for a ghostwriting package and it felt almost like scary or like uncomfortable to charge that much?
Yes, and I still have that feeling. 25 years in, that has not necessarily gone away. I've just gotten better at like looking as though I'm put together. But yes, absolutely. So when I came out of the publishing house, I only knew that level of financial contracting. So I took with me the rates that we were paying other ghostwriters because that's the only experience I had. So when I first started out, I was not charging 30,000. I was charging like $10 and $15,000 a book. And to me, that was great because it was better than $12 an hour, which was, what we were paying the editors. And so I very, very slowly, every once in a while, those first 8 years of being a freelancer, raised my rates a little bit until I got up to like 25, 30. By, I think, the 8th year, I was maybe 25, 30. I'd maybe done one at 50, but that was like a ton of money. And so I have an entertainment lawyer who's also an author. So she gets the creative space. And I was asking her about a clause in one of my contracts and sort of like offhandedly said, by the way, I know you work with a lot of writers and creatives. Am I charging what I should be charging? And she said, you're charging less than half of what you should be charging with your background and how many books you've written. I was like, but I would have never known if I didn't ask her because in my corporate roles, I got in trouble twice when people asked what my salary was. And there's no reason to lie about that. So if somebody asked, what are you being paid? I told them. And then I got in trouble for that. And so when I left to be my own boss, I still had that fear of like getting my hand slapped. It never occurred to me that I could ask other freelancers and other writers what they were charging. So after that conversation with my lawyer, I was like, well, shoot, I'm going to start increasing my rates. But still, even with my lawyer's like approval, it was hard because I I was used to a certain amount and then like, oh my gosh, to double that? Who do I think I am? I'm, this young lady. I've been in this career for, at that point, maybe 10, 12 years. There are so many, I'm comparing myself. There's so many people who've done this for 20, 30 years who charge all this, so much more. I don't have a doctorate degrees. I don't even have a master's degree. Why? Why would I charge more? Why would people pay that? And so I really had to work on the confidence level. And I still have to work on the confidence level because, 25 years into it, every time I raise my rates again, I'm like, oh, it feels scary until the first person says yes. And then once the first person says yes, I'm like, okay, I got this.
Right.
But it's
But
always
when
the very next time I raise my rates, I'm a little bit like anxious until somebody says yes. And of course, when you raise your rates, more people are going to say no before they say yes. But that's how you build your business and eventually end up with a higher income and a lower amount of projects on your desk.
Right, right. And people might not know that when you like, let's say you did charge, 30, 50K to write somebody's book. That's a process of, I think on your website, it was like 9 to 12 months is typically
Yeah.
how long the whole process takes.
Yep. That is how long it takes. Yeah. Yeah. I used to try to keep track of all of my hours just to see, like, could I average out the projects? And it's sort of impossible because, yes, I can count all the time at my desk, but my brain never turns off. So I'm thinking of like chapter ideas and segues in the shower and before I go to bed and when I take walks, like it just never shuts off. So, but I would say on average, most projects take between 400 and 600 hours of work
Wow.
between research, interviews, transcription, outlining, writing, editing, helping them, go to the next stage, whatever that is. It is a lot of work.
Yeah. Wow. So can you give, and I know that it probably shifts a little bit slightly per client depending on, if you can see them locally or if you do it all virtually, but from what I understand, it sounds like your process is basically you're talking with somebody, you guys make the decision like, okay, we're going to do this, you're going to ghostwrite my book, and then it basically starts with you beginning those many interviews, and then once you've completed those interviews, then what happens at that point? Can you give like kind of a high
Yeah.
level of what that process looks like for you?
Yes. So let's say there's an ideal situation. In an ideal world, I would do interviews with the client for the first 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8, but at least the first 4 to 6 weeks. After that, I'm going to have probably 300, if not more, pages in a Word document of just raw conversation. I then take that and I start to go through it and put together an outline, what I think would be the most intriguing, the most true to their story, the most engaging. And it doesn't always have to be chronological. Sometimes you can do a reverse memoir, you can do a braided memoir when you're braiding, time. So you can braid like childhood with present day. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but I will come up with what idea I think is the most intriguing and I'll present it to the author and we'll talk through it. And if they agree with that, I'm like, cool, this is the outline. So now I'm going to start piecing together all 400 pages of story into this order. Just raw data, dump it in one document, dump it in one document. Every chapter like is probably going to be 30 to 40, if not 60 pages of just talk. Once I have all the content in place, then I start writing the rough draft, the first rough draft of all of the chapters. And I like to try and write 3,500, 4,000 words a week. And so that might be one chapter, it might be two, depending on the length of the book and, do they want shorter chapters? But that's how that goes. So the outlining process usually doesn't take longer than 1 or 2 weeks. The writing process is going to take between 4 and 6, sometimes 7 months after that. And then after that, after we have a really solid manuscript, they've got several options. We can do a beta read, which is where we find your ideal readers and we have them read the manuscript and give us feedback on, are there any gaps? Is anything offensive? Do you want more details about anything? Is anything unclear? We give them like a list of 10 to 12 questions to ask. So we can do a round of beta reading that we would then talk through and see, does any of this feel true that you need to implement more information? If so, yes, let's add it in. And then we may do a developmental edit as well to have like a professional editor come in and just see like, are there any holes? from a professional perspective that we need to fill, anything should, that should be changed around. Once all of that is done, now it's ready for the final copy edit. So I bring in a copy editor and have them like clean up the grammar and word choice and all of that. So that part can take 2 to 3.5 months. And then you've got a final manuscript that's in really great shape and you can take it to the next level, whether you want to self-publish, you want to work with a custom publisher. If they want to try to get a traditional deal, they'll also need a book proposal, but they typically also need to have, a certain level of social media numbers and platform engagement to even be considered for that. But that's the very high level process.
Interesting. And the difference between a manuscript and a book proposal is the book proposal is a lot more concise, right? A manuscript is
Right.
basically a full kind of first draft of the entire book.
Yes. Yeah. Manuscript is, I would say, like maybe the second or third draft. Like it's a really solid draft where the book proposal is similar to a business plan. They're going to be anywhere between 40 and 60 pages. Some go longer, but it is your best foot forward when contacting an agent to see if they will represent you or for them to pitch to a publisher to see, does your book seem unique enough, timely enough that they would consider giving you a financial advance and taking you on? So it will include, the outline, chapter summaries for all the chapters, 2 writing samples, so 2 chapters fully written for the writing samples, sections on the author's biography and all of their social media connections, everything they've ever published before, any speaking engagements they've had. Do they have a list of people who are willing to endorse it? And are those people, do they have names that the readership would recognize? And then there's another section, which is a lot of research on market statistics. So who is your ideal reader? What are they purchasing right now? What are 3, 4, 5, 6 books that have been published in the last 5 years that are similar, that have done well? So it's a lot of research, but it is very helpful to
And
be
do
able
you
to.
help them do that research?
I do. Yeah. Sometimes people will hire me to write the proposal as well as write the book.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. There's
Mhm.
so many levels to this. So you must have a hard cap then on how many clients you will work with at a time because of how involved you have to be.
I should have. I do not have a hard cap. You can't determine, I can't ever determine when people are going to find me.
Mhm.
And so it really depends on when people contact me because I don't do any marketing. It's all either word of mouth or people finding my website. And so not to say that I shouldn't do marketing. I think it would be helpful. I just haven't yet. So if somebody contacts me and they have a project that I'm interested in, it's either do I have the time to take it now? Could we push it out till November? If so, here's an invoice for a small first payment to save your spot. If that doesn't work and I don't have the time, I'm going to introduce them to another ghostwriter who I think would be a great fit and then get a referral fee from that introduction if that goes to contract.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So what's like the most amount of clients that you've been working with at one time?
The most I had ever worked with at a time was 11.
Wow.
And that was a lot. And they were all in different stages. I could never take on 11 and be an interview stage with all of them.
Mhm.
I would never sleep. I would never eat. I would never leave my house. So honestly, when I have, any number of projects, some have to be in the end stages where I've already finished the writing and we are now in editing and I'm helping them like connect with a publisher.
Mhm.
And then some will be at the stage where I've already done the initial interviews and I'm writing the content, you know, weekly. And then some can be in the earliest stages of when I'm just, we've met, we've started, now we're doing those initial interviews. That's the only way it works for me to have multiple projects.
Mhm. Yeah. So the interview stage is probably the most time demanding for you, I would bet.
I think so. Yeah, because that has to work around 2 schedules, it's mine and theirs. Whereas the writing, it's my schedule. So it's, do I feel like writing at 7 a.m. this morning? Great. Do I want to stay up till midnight? Probably not, but sometimes I have. So I can be a lot more flexible in those 4 to 7 months of writing than I can be in the interviews.
Mhm. And how do you go about determining if this is somebody that you want to, like, fly out to go meet in person to handle the interviews? Is that something they decide or
Yes. Yes. I am totally fine doing everything on Zoom as long as they are comfortable with it. When people do ask if it's a possibility for me to fly out, then yeah, absolutely, let's fly out. So we'll schedule it together. They pay for the flight. They, reimburse me for hotel, whatever else, and I'll go out there for a day or two, or I've been with clients for a whole week before.
Wow. A
Yeah.
day or two. Wow, those must be intense days then.
They are, but sometimes that's, really what somebody needs. A lot of time like that. So I think the most I've ever done in a day was like 11 hours of interviews in one day, which was a lot, a lot. But I only had 2 days with that client. And so we wanted to get through the whole, like, tell me everything at a high level so that I can start to put together that outline. And then everything else we can do on Zoom calls, but they really wanted to meet me in person. So when it's in person, we will typically do 2, 3, maybe 3.5, 4 hours. And then we'll, like, let's have some food. We are both wilting. And then, you take your potty breaks in there, and they may want to move from one location to another. I've had clients who wanted to drive me around their old city where they live so they could point out places they lived and where they worked and whatnot. So that's fun too. But yeah, I mean, you've got to eat like 1, 2, 3 times a day. So you both just work together to go like, we'll go as late as you want to work. And also, I am not a night owl. So once my eyes start doing this, I'm like, we can start again tomorrow morning at 7 if you need to, but I have to go to bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, this is so cool. It's such a creative process because I feel like when people think about, having somebody write for them, I would imagine that a lot of people's mind goes to like politicians and, they have PR people who write their speeches. And I had a little bit of experience with that, which is pretty involved. And it's more so about making sure that you like say the right things.
Mhm.
But when you're writing a memoir for somebody, you have to go so much deeper than that. And you have to know, I could imagine like somebody driving around showing you the places that you might be talking about. It's
Mhm.
probably massively helpful for you because now you know like, okay, that building that they talked about, I know what color it is now.
Yeah.
Like you get those kind of details. You have to see what they saw.
Yes. And I'll ask them to, if I'm not meeting them in person, send me photos so I can see, or documentation, anything you want me to see that'll help me better understand what we're talking about. So on that drive with the lady, I was filming the drive so I could take a picture of each house so that when I'm writing about it, I can write about it because I've seen it, so
Mhm.
what color were the shingles? How many trees were in the yard? What did the front door look like? So those little details can be really helpful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I know you said that like there's a lot of kind of personal memoirs, but you also said that you have some clients that want to write about like business.
Hmm.
And I've found like something that I've found in doing my interviews is that sometimes when I'm interviewing somebody about what they do, I'm able to reveal like gaps in their business, in their messaging. And I know you'd mentioned that sometimes when you start working with people who want to write about their business or their formula for success, you've had it happen a couple times where you get into that process and you realize they don't actually have anything on paper and they basically want you to kind of create the foundation for their whole business.
Yep.
Can you think of a client that happened with and kind of how you approached it?
Yeah, it does happen, surprisingly, especially when somebody's, a C-suite executive or, a business owner and they don't have written documentation of their processes or anything. But yes, sometimes they do ask you to reverse engineer their their business ideas. So in those instances, it can be tricky because they're already running a successful business, right? And so in their mind, they think, I've got it nailed. I know what I'm doing because I've been doing it for 10, 20 years. But when it comes time to have them tell me the stories, there can be a disconnect in, do you remember what you did when you first got started? Tell me about some of your struggles. That's the place where it becomes difficult because often people who want to write business books really only want to focus on all of the positives. They don't want to focus on the struggles when they were, moving to office. They had to fire people. They got in, a fight with their business partner, and trying to convince them that all of that is important to include as well can be a little bit of a tug. And sometimes they relax and they go, okay, I understand why this is important. And they'll tell you. And sometimes you don't get much. And when that happens, I say, are there other people in your business that I could interview to fill in some of the gaps. And so that can be helpful, or if they have a spouse, or if they have children that are in the business, or anybody, do they have a business partner? That can be really helpful to pull details. And then I can go back to that original author and say, hey, these people brought up a couple stories. I'd love to talk to you about these stories. And then, kind of refresh their memory. Oh, sure, we can talk about that. So sometimes I have to get data from other sources and bring it back to them to get them to give me more details.
Yeah, I found that that's like super, super important when it comes to social content specifically, because you're right. A lot of people in business and entrepreneurship, they want to talk about the success and they want to, market themselves and put their best foot forward. But especially when it comes to social content, most people are not going to resonate with that success story as much as they're going to connect to hearing about the failures and all the stuff that didn't work. So I
Right.
think it's a huge disservice, not only to that person, but to their audience if that person is like not talking about the low points and what didn't work. That's what like humanizes
Yeah.
the story and them as a brand.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to read a book about somebody's life that's been perfect, because nobody can relate to that. Why do I want to read your memoir if everything has gone right in your life? And why do I want to read your business book if you've never had a struggle? Yuck. No. Give me something I can connect with.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow. So
Mhm.
how does your process work now in terms of determining what you are going to charge a client? I assume like some people might have an idea of like how long of a book they want, but I'm sure some people don't have that thought. So how do you go about determining that?
So if somebody doesn't know, and most people don't know, like how many word counts equate to how many page numbers, so we do have a conversation about that. I do get requests from people who say, I just want to write an 80-page book, because they think that's a lot of words or a lot of pages, and they just, haven't read a book in a while, which is fine. But so there's an education process that goes on. And then once I understand, what do they want the book for? Is it a family book, family legacy? You just want your family and friends to have it. You're going to print off 50 copies, 200 copies. Do you want pictures? Like, what is the purpose of this book? Or are you going to use it for marketing purposes? And if that's the case, do I also need to provide you with like 52 quotes from your book that you can pull from for social media? Like, are you going to use it to advance your brand, your business, whatever that is? So we'll talk through all the different ways in which they want to use the content past just a book. And we also talk through like, what is their availability for interviews? Some people need a book done in a faster period of time to hit some deadline. I sometimes can work with that. Sometimes I'm just not the right fit and I'll pass them on. But I need to know quite a few details before I prepare a quote. And then that quote is not anymore based on word count. I used to charge based on word count. But then, as we've talked about, there's so much more that goes into it than just me sitting at a desk thinking of, how to finish the sentence. It's all the things that go into how to develop the scenes, how to develop the characters. What are some additional ways that I can add value to this project and to this client? So now I do just like a total package that covers the book writing, the transcripts, the developmental edits, the beta reading, the copy editing, any other information that I'm putting together for them, and come up with a price that I think seems fair for the work.
Hmm. Okay. So if somebody has a really tight deadline, that's something that almost certainly would increase the price.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes we do add a rush fee into our prices. If that means I have to stop something else I'm working on, or if I know I'm gonna have to work, overnight a lot, or, do something different with my schedule, that's more for a rush fee. We also have something called an asshole fee, and you can't always determine this up front. Unfortunately, sometimes people are on their best behavior until like a month and a half in. But if you know up front that the person's going to be difficult, like if they are a staunch perfectionist, or if I mean, there's a whole number of things they can say that'll tip you off. If you just know from those first few interviews that they're going to be a difficult person to work with, you can add 20% to your rate and go, if they're willing to pay this, I will spend that 20% on self-care. I'll get massages regularly. I'll double my therapy sessions. I will XYZ, knowing that this is going to be a little bit harder emotionally and schedule wise for me.
Oh my God, an asshole fee. So how do you go about, like, I'm assuming
You
this
don't
has
tell them.
happened.
You
Yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah.
tell them, like,
Yeah.
by the way, you're an asshole and I'm charging you an extra 20%. You don't do that.
Slip it on the invoice, like a line for asshole fee.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you go about having that conversation with them then? If you're already in the process and you guys have agreed to do this together and then they're being super difficult or they're being a dick, how do you have that conversation with them?
So it gets tricky because ideally you would have a sense of what the project's going to be like before you submit a quote. And sometimes that doesn't happen. So there have definitely been times where I've gone to contract with a client and they've, acted like perfect angels, and then we get into it and they are terrors. And now it's too late to add a fee. But what I do have in my contract is another clause about scope creep. I used to limit that simply to number of words when I was charging per word. Like if we had agreed that it was going to be a 60,000 word manuscript, but now you want 85,000 words, great, we need to renegotiate because it's scope creep. Now that can include word count, time, time they want to be with me on the phone if they need more hand holding. There's all sorts of things you can add that would include kind of abusive behavior. Although I do say, like, if anybody's being abusive to you, you should just fire them. But yeah, there's other things. If they're actually calling you at 11 p.m., once or twice a week to share ideas when your contracts, specifically states your last, business hour is like 4 p.m., you can point out those things and say, like, hey, I've noticed this is going on. The contract says XYZ. If you need additional hours, I'm happy to supply that to you at X amount of rate, weekly or monthly or whatever. So there are ways you can address it. But
Okay.
sometimes the only way to address it is to fire the client.
hmm So for you, it's an asshole fee, but for them, it might just be worded as like scope creep or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Mhm.
Interesting. I love that you shared that. That's so helpful. Because I mean,
Yeah.
with something like this, with something like creative writing work, scope creep is such a common thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow,
Mhm.
that's so cool. So, like, the reason that I am so interested in ghostwriting, because like it's the similarity behind both of our work, and I think we both kind of pour our efforts into writing something that people may never know we wrote, which is kind of an interesting art in itself. And
Yep.
like for me with my clients, I don't go around sharing like, hey, look, here's this post I wrote that went viral, because then I'm outing my client.
Yeah.
So when you first got into this, or even like at any point in your career, have you ever felt like that bothered you, like writing things that, thousands of people see and get moved by,
Yeah.
but not ever being able to say like that was me?
Yeah. Especially at the start of my career. I was young, I was in my early 20s, and I felt like, how am I going to build this resume if nobody knows that I worked on it? So for me it was both logistical, like, how can I build, you know, this career if I have to be quiet about it? And I just, personally got butthurt about it because I would, I'd see them doing really well and I'd be like, shoot, I can't ever say that I worked with them. So it was a bit of an ego ding, but I will say, as I've done this longer and longer, it has just become a normal part of the process. Are there still books that I work on that I wish I could say that that I have? Sure. But that's part of it. I mean, very rarely will I get a cover credit anymore, which is, so and so with Alice Sullivan. Sometimes I'll be mentioned in the acknowledgments, usually not as a ghostwriter, but sometimes like as an editorial consultant or just, my name along, a string of other people's names. But some people will add me as an editor on their Amazon post as well. So that's nice. But the majority of books I work on do not have my physical name anywhere.
And is that something that you guys agree on beforehand and they say like, no, I want to give you some credit, or like, no, not at all? Like, how do you navigate that with each client?
Yep. It's on page 1 of my contract, whether or not they're okay with giving me either cover credit or in the acknowledgments, or can I at least put it on my website and use it in my resume to help me get additional clients, so that we agree on that before, first page of the contract. Yeah. And
Yeah.
some people are like, yes, absolutely, I'm going to put your name on the cover. This was a partnership. And then other people, for whatever reason, don't want to acknowledge a contributor, and that's fine.
Right. And I know you said that you sign NDAs with a lot of your clients that like prevents you from speaking about being part of their book. So how have you navigated that throughout your career? Like how do you market yourself and talk about the results that you've gotten without breaking those NDAs?
Yeah. So all of the books on my website are ones that I can talk about publicly,
Mm.
even if I'm not promoting them, but they're there. And that acts as like both an online resume for potential clients. And also, if another publisher or another agent is considering me, they'll see like, okay, here's the body of work on a resume. So the kind of fun gray area within publishing is that, yes, we have to sign NDAs, but on your resume, even if there's a book that I had to sign an NDA for, I can still say, worked on a book about this topic or this genre published by this publisher in this year. And so you can still have like a line item for the project, but you can't list the title and you can't list the authors.
Mm. Interesting. So in that line item, could you say anything about like how the book did, like if it became a bestseller or something, or is there
Yeah.
a line where you're giving away too much?
I mean, I personally don't think so. If it won any awards, I'm going to list that. And then, of course, like I guess somebody could research and figure it out. But for the most part, the resume is more for, somebody just to read it and go, oh, she has her shit together. I'm not going to research, deep dive into any of these listings, but it's great to know that, I have a LinkedIn presence, it matches my website, and I have a nice resume that looks good. Great. We trust her.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That is so cool. I
Yeah.
feel like I could have asked so many other questions, but I want to come back full circle to the question that I asked you at the opening. I asked you to write down what is the most you've ever earned from a book that nobody knows you wrote. Can you show us your answer?
Hopefully you can see it.
225K. Wow. That must have been a big project.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. How long did it take you?
Almost 2 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And did you go into it knowing it was going to take 2 years or did
Yeah.
it kind of keep scope creeping?
No, that one we knew the time length. The scope did creep on that one with the information that the author wanted me to include, but we did already know I think it was 20 months or 22 months of a
Wow.
project. So,
And how did you determine that it was going to take that long?
uh, well, I asked, so I try and keep things at a year or less, just because I feel like sometimes if it goes beyond a year, it just drags out and drags out, and somebody's, you have every reason to keep putting it off. So I presented when we were talking about the information, I said, we can do this in a year. And the client said, actually, I would prefer to space it out over this amount of time. So it was the client's recommendation.
Nice.
I was like,
Wow.
sure.
That is so cool. I bet you people who watch this are going to start Googling ghostwriting after this. Like, how do I become a ghostwriter?
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool.
I wrote the book about that. It's called
There
The
you go.
Guide to Ghostwriting.
There you go. For
Yeah.
anybody watching, that's where you can start.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
there's so much to know about it. And even, I still learn. I still learn every week about production or, things having to do with custom publishing or working with agents or book proposals or new ideas for manuscripts. So it's constant education.
Hmm.
But I like that because it helps me not be stagnant.
Hmm. Yeah. You always want to feel like you're evolving and leveling up.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Awesome. Well, the last question that I always like to ask everybody is like I said, I do this content for people who relate to feeling like an inspired idiot. In my opinion, every successful person felt like an inspired idiot at some point.
Oh, yeah.
So if you could pass on one piece of advice to people who relate to feeling like that, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Everybody's an idiot. Nobody's going to pay attention to you feeling like an idiot. Everybody's walking around feeling that way. We're all pretending. I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, I do. I've done this for 25 years, but like, I still don't feel like an adult. So it's
That's
fine.
true.
Just, do what you do it well, and it'll work out.
Just go for it.
Just go for it.
Nice. Very much the environment that I would expect of someone who writes for a living.
Yeah. This is the only thing I wish I could find some other place in the office for it, because it's like this monstrosity, but I have to have a printer. Let me show you what I use. Where did I put it? The woman with too many gadgets at her desk.
Excited to ask you some, maybe I always say like dumb questions about your craft.
I'll give you some dumb answers.
Yes. Okay. We're having fun already. I love it.